Welcome to Tap Into an Expert, the podcast where we sit down with industry experts to get answers on all the questions you should be asking. Today, we are speaking with Lauren Livak Gilbert. Lauren is a commerce strategist and executive director of the Digital Shelf Institute. She has 10 years of experience in digital commerce and design and has consulted with hundreds of omnichannel businesses, ranging from Fortune 100 global brands to regional startups. Lauren, thank you very much for joining us here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's great having you too. I love how this came from a in-person meeting at a conference. So thanks for having me.
It doesn't even happen anymore, so I appreciate it. Everybody at those conferences just walks with their head down and tries to cover their badge and everything. So actually meeting somebody and it going somewhere is phenomenal. But today, you have a lot of expertise in this particular area. It is the hottest topic within retail, obviously. We're going to be exploring the very fascinating world of retail innovation and retail media networks. So we're going to do a deep dive into how things have evolved and how new strategies are shaping the commerce landscape, plus what it means for brands and retailers alike. So in segment 1, we're doing retail media revolution, the evolution of retail media in commerce strategy. The past 30 years has gone from, believe it or not, just the first online advertisement. It was a banner ad for AT&T on Wired.com. Back then it was hotwired.com. Now we have complex omnichannel strategies. So the journey of retail media has been absolutely remarkable in a very short period of time. Understanding this evolution helps us appreciate the sophistication of today's retail media landscape. So from basic digital signage that we are all used to seeing and kind of block out, to integrated campaigns that span multiple platforms, the advancements have been quite significant. And with this evolution, retail media has transformed from a siloed effort into what we're going to talk today about being an integral part of your broader commerce strategies. When we were preparing for this episode, something that you mentioned really stood out to me, which is reframing your thinking on how retail media is connected to the broader commerce and more specifically e-commerce strategy. And it's a shift from how retail media needs to be connected to the overall content strategy so that consumers have a consistent experience with your brand across every channel. It's no longer the days where you could just throw up one random banner ad and expect to get results from that. So the first question I want to dive into, what drove the emergence of retail media as the single largest innovation in marketing in the past 30 years? And how can the average consumer even grasp its significance in the overall marketing mix today?
I think it's a great question. I also really love that you pinpointed it's only been 30 years. Like I love saying that to people. When you think about e-commerce in general, I always use the comparison of in-store shopping has been around since like BC times, right? Like if you think about like markets and the concept of stores, but the first ever department store was created in the 1700s, but Amazon opened in 1995 as a bookstore, right? So we've only been at this for 30 years, but because of the speed of innovation and technology, things have happened pretty quickly. And I think really the emergence of retail media happened because of the emergence of e-commerce, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have these retailers who have platforms where they're selling their products. They have space on their websites to be able to showcase it, but they also have first-party data. So they have access to how consumers are shopping. So they can then target ads and they can target specific moments in time that are curated for the consumer. And that created this revolution of retail media where you now have a captive audience who's already going to your site, and you can showcase to them the types of products they want, how they might be interested in something. And then, with cookies and all of that, if they die or not, we do not know, but it follows you along all of the channels that you go to and you shop on. So I think it really was paired with the emergence of e-commerce as a growth channel. And it's really important now. And I think the big shift has happened recently because of the economy in the world that we live in. There is a challenge for profitability for brands and for retailers. And I think retailers now see retail media as an additional growth driver for them, where previously they might not have looked at it that way. And that's why we are seeing the emergence of hundreds of retail media platforms, because they're saying, oh, wait, I can ask brands to spend more money with me, to use the information I have about their consumers to market to them with ads on my retail platform. So that, I think, has caused even more of an explosion recently, because all of the retailers are looking to that as a huge opportunity. And then that's falling back onto the brands.
Absolutely. I think it's very interesting. I mean, exactly as you're saying, obviously retailers are now seeing this as a profit driver, as a real revenue opportunity. And so they are launching new offerings constantly. Like every other week, there's a new offering that you could buy from one of the different retailers. And I think that creates more challenges for that consistency, because a banner ad was fine at one point in time, but now you have Criteo, or you have, Epsilon, or you have these different platforms that are offering different type of experiences just on product pages or on home pages. That experience is then different what you're getting hit with on social. It's different what you're getting hit with in store, post-purchase, cart abandonment. Talk about, why is it crucial for brands to have that consistent experience, and how do they even navigate it these days when they're being pulled in so many different directions by so many different retail media networks?
It is challenging for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point about the banner ad being just one option, I was in London we hosted an event in London, and Tesco spoke. They have 20 different types of ads on their site. That's not just one banner ad. That's multiple different types, multiple different dimensions, multiple different ways of displaying your product. Multiply that by all of the retail media networks you're working with. That's a lot that you have to think through. To your point about a consistent experience, think about yourself as a shopper. Like, we are all shoppers. We buy stuff online. I bought something on Amazon today, right? And you want to see the same information about a product. If anyone's ever heard me speak, I'm gluten-free. I talk about it a lot. And it's a really big challenge when you're buying online. If you go to a retail media ad and it says like gluten-free snack, and you click on it and it drives you to a product detail page, but nowhere on the product detail page does it say gluten-free, I'm confused. I probably will click off, because I'll be like, oh, well, I can't actually eat this. And I'm not going to dig to find out the information unless I really know about the brand. And so it creates a really inconsistent experience that really degrades both the brand quality, but also really affects your conversion, right? Because you're not actually bringing the consumer on a journey with your content through all of your different channels. And the world of brand building was really important a few years ago. I think people have shifted to more like performance, but are coming back to brand and remembering why it is so important to focus on your brand, especially because of all the competition in the marketplace. And focusing on brand means consistent storytelling, consistent content, every single place that you experience a product. Like, you can use Apple as a perfect example. The store, to the packaging, to the experience on your phone. If you have an iPhone, it's sleek, it's modern, it's simple. You feel the same way every time you experience it. That shouldn't be different from when you click on a retail media ad. You go to Amazon, you go to Walmart, you go to your D2C site, you get an email. It should all look and feel the same. But the reason why that's so hard is because there's so many teams involved internally in an organization to execute on those types of strategies. And it's not something that has had to be done previously.
So you bring up something so interesting. One of the things you mentioned is an ad driving you to the product detail page. And that's where the consistency typically we see fall apart. I've been more excited about the opportunity product detail pages than any other part of a website or web experience, because I think it's so underutilized. The only things that we've seen on product detail pages is advertisement for competitive products. So what do you see as the evolution? What do you see as the innovation happening with product pages, with product detail pages and retail media? How are they connecting together besides just an ad being displayed for a competitive product?
So the connection, like I said before, is one, driving the consistent experience, right? You want to make sure that you're representing the product correctly when you're going to the PDP. But I think the other piece is connected to the relationship between brands and retailers. And what I mean by that is you have over 600 retail media platforms right now. Brands have a very finite amount of money, and that amount of money is not increasing significantly year over year. So all of the retailers are fighting for a certain number of dollars at the brand. But what we found in a recent research study we actually did with Stratably is that PDP is directly connected to the amount of investment that a brand will make with a retailer. And what I mean by that is if the content that you are able to share on the retail media site, the ease at which you can send it to the retail media site, presence of above the fold, below the fold content actually impacts how many dollars a brand will spend with that retailer. So we actually found that 50% of brands have reduced ad spend on a product due to poor PDP quality.
Wow.
And 71% of digital leaders say that PDP quality significantly influences their ROAS. So they see a direct correlation between strong PDP content and the actual performance of their retail media. So they're making decisions based on how they're working with their retailer to get them the content, to have a good experience on their PDP, and also how they can tell the story of their brand.
That's fascinating. I mean, if you think about it, that's the most important place. That's that lean-in moment. And we always find that's where the least helpful information about a product really exists. It's like copy and paste from the back of a product packaging. And that's not what consumers need at that point in time. So it's a lot to think about from a brand, somebody trying to launch a new brand. How do they need to think about this incredibly important structure of their organization? Can you outline the essential roles brands need to develop to enhance their retail media strategies? Are these entirely different marketing teams? Like now you have to have your retail media team. And how do these members collaborate with other functions to ensure that unified approach that you're saying is so crucial?
This is my favorite question because it's where I spend a lot of my time. And I think it's a spectrum, right? So if you are, let's start with large brands. If you're a large brand, obviously there's a lot of people that are working in your company. I think the biggest challenge is connecting your retail media teams into your e-commerce or digital teams. Oftentimes what you find is that the retail media, or it might be called paid media, or even fall into like the paid search element, they usually sit over here and then the e-commerce team kind of sits over here and they don't necessarily talk to each other. So from a large organizational standpoint, you probably have a person or a team dedicated to retail media. If you've never talked to them, go find them. Go have a conversation. Bring them into your meetings, have broader campaign planning that includes PDP content, retail media, direct to consumer, search, both paid and organic. So bring all of those people into the fold and have a holistic conversation, because that's really what an omnichannel strategy looks like. So in those larger organizations, you find that they exist. Those teams are somewhere, but they're probably not talking to each other. So how can you kind of bridge that gap? I would say in the mid-sized to smaller organizations, you have a bit more of an advantage because you probably have less people. So you have a little bit less to kind of navigate. And I would say you should start from a place of you can operate agilely and you can really quickly make changes and you can test and learn and you can understand this process. And if you can do that, then what you're doing is actually you're building out teams that think holistically rather than think in a silo, because that's really the big difference, I would say, between a large organization and smaller mid-size. You don't have as many silos, so you can think about this omnichannel process. But a common thing that you can start with, whether you're big, small, medium size, is keeping the consumer at the center. If you get rid of, hey, this is sales, this is marketing, this is how I'm thinking about it, and you more think about what is the consumer experience, what do they want, what do they want to hear about, that changes the conversation. And if you start from there, it's much easier to fix the problem of finger pointing or not knowing who does what or being disjointed.
Yeah, I mean, people are only going to be repeat buyers or buy in the first place if it's a nice experience for that consumer.
Exactly.
So it's good that you're bringing that up, because too many people forget that that's got to be the heart of all of this.
Well, it's easy to, though, because you sit in your organization and in a very positive way, you're like, oh, we love this messaging. We're so excited about this brand. And you sit and you talk internally, and it's sometimes hard to kind of take those blinders off. But I think what we're realizing is if you don't, it's going to be really, really hard to compete because a lot of the smaller mid-sized brands start that way and they don't have some of the complexities of a larger org to work through. And they think, what does the consumer want? And how do I build the best consumer experience? Full stop.
Absolutely. I mean, the little brands, they have a lot less to play with. So they have to really focus and pay attention to their audience, pay attention to their consumer and the feedback they're getting. A lot of these big brands, they have so much money that they're just bulldozing. And then by the time they lift their head up to get that feedback from the consumer, it's too late in some approaches. What's expected from the small brands, the medium brands that are going to these bigger retailers? Are they expected to participate in retail media? And if they are not necessarily pushed towards that by the retailer, should they be? At what level, what size of an organization in your mind should be really prioritizing retail media strategy?
I think it's less of the size and more of your priority as a brand and your key retailers. Because like most things in e-commerce, it's a spectrum. So the larger players of like the Walmarts and Amazons and Targets of the world, they're big behemoths, right? And it does take a lot of investment to get to pay to play from a retail media standpoint. But if you're a smaller brand and you bring category insights and you're a disruptor, that's a huge opportunity for you. So I would say for smaller brands, it's more about positioning yourself in your category and bringing category insights to the right retailer that's going to drive the most growth, profitability, whatever your goal is for your brand. Because a lot of these conversations happen in JBP, in joint business planning. And if you're a smaller brand, sometimes it's hard to get a seat at the table. But if you pick the right retailer and you have the right conversation by bringing those specific insights, you can get a foot in the door. But if you're a smaller brand that isn't bringing anything to the table and having those conversations, it's going to be really hard to break into those bigger players. So my suggestion would be to think about, where do you think your consumers are shopping? And then partner with that retailer and collaborate with them and share new category insights, explain why you're a differentiator or you're a disruptor, and really provide value to that retailer. And then you will in turn kind of unlock the door a bit to be able to access some of the retail media, because the spend limits can be pretty high for a lot of the big players. And I know that smaller players don't have that, but strategically think about that.
Give me an idea. What does that mean, pretty high?
Oh, millions of dollars. In the millions of dollars.
And they have to be thinking about this with every single retail network that they're working with.
100%. And so like if you're using a CPG company, for example, right, they probably sell, this is a broad brushstroke, on average to like maybe 30 to 50 retailers. And that can include like a Kroger, a Tesco, an Amazon, a Walmart, a Target, lots of different retailers. But they only have a finite amount of budget, and that has to be distributed to all of the different retailers based on sales, based on the retail teams that are working to identify like, where do we have exclusives, where's their innovation? Like there's a lot of complexity about how that gets divvied up. But year over year, that number doesn't grow or shrinks. Large brands really have to prioritize where they're spending their dollars. And a lot of that is really connected to what retailers are sharing data with me. Where is there an opportunity to try some new innovation? Who's doing something different, which can help us move the needle? So there's a lot of give and take in the relationship between the brands and the retailers and retail media.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So that brings us to segment 2, retail media networks in general. And what you said earlier is, the heart of all of this is just the first person data, right? Like that's what all of retail media has been historically founded on. The ability to get the right message to the right shopper at the exact right time. That's what first person data enables you to do. So it really does provide unprecedented targeting capabilities. The data-driven approach, it enables incredibly highly personalized messages that resonate at a crucial touch point along that shopper journey. So, for me, one of the stats that I always found fascinating, and then I really got it when I had a baby, was the 2 products that are packaged together most frequently that somebody buys and then buys the other when they have a baby is diapers and beer.
That checks out, I feel like.
It does. And although, beer or alcohol can't really participate in retail media because of, certain legal situations. If I walk into Target and I am buying beer, and they know, because Target knows and every other retailer will know that I just had a baby based on everything else that I've been buying and the frequency that I've been buying. And while I'm getting beer, it's like, don't forget your diapers. Like, that's an amazing first party data experience. And it's actually helpful to the consumer, which is why it does boast higher conversion rates compared to traditional digital advertising. So that's why I think we're seeing this shift. Traditional advertising, it has its ROAS, it has its benchmarks. And if leveraged the right way, this first person data makes all the difference in those conversion rates going way up. And the ability, more importantly, to measure the ROAS accurately and attribute sales. It's a huge draw for brands. Every marketer will say, we know 50% of our marketing works. We just don't know which 50%.
Which 50%?
And retail media and that first person data, that starts to change that narrative. The level of precision and measurement and optimization, it's not able to be achieved with traditional advertising methods. You don't really know who's watching your television commercials. All of those type of things are very hard to measure. So retail media allows brands to maintain a consistent presence across the shopper journey from that discovery all the way to purchase. And what I'm also seeing a little bit more of now is the post-purchase experience as well, creating that more cohesive brand experience, the most cohesive you could get from awareness of a product, education, consideration, purchase, post-purchase, and then getting them back into that loop. So Lauren, what advantages does retail media offer brands compared to your digital advertising channels besides that, such ever important first party data?
I mean, I think the first thing is you are where the consumer is shopping, right? So like if you're on a retailer site, they're purchasing something, right? So you have a captive audience and you can direct them directly to that site, where if you had like an offsite ad, it would be harder to kind of drive them necessarily back to the site because you don't know what they're doing or what they're searching for. It might not be the purchase moment. So I think that's the first thing. And I think you said it, the data, right? You know if someone's having a baby and you know how long it takes for that baby to grow. So you know what suggestions you should provide from a product standpoint when they're 3 months old, 5 months old, 1 year. So you can follow them along that journey. I was also talking to another brand, and a really cool example that they shared was based on first party data from a retailer. They found out that everybody who bought the generic meat from their grocery store also bought pasta sauce because they were making lasagna. So what they did is they used retail media to target the category of ground beef, and they had pasta sauce, and the retail media ad had a recipe for how to cook lasagna. So they were connecting the dots between all of the different pieces, and that creates a really exciting consumer journey. And if you think about today's consumer, and I like to call them the omni shopper because they shop in many different places, what they really are looking for is relevant, personalized, accurate data, and they want to have an experience when they're shopping. They don't just necessarily want to click on something, not know any answers to a question, and click off and get frustrated and go somewhere else. They want to be guided along a journey that's very specific to them. And I think the word personalization gets tossed around a bit in this regard, and it doesn't mean like, hey, Eric, here's a product, or like, hey, Lauren. It means, hey, Eric, you have a baby. So we know that they are now 5 months old. You might need this product. What do you think? And then you can add it to your cart. That's the level of personalization that retail media can help you navigate because you have that purchase behavior. I think the challenge is getting that first party data from the retailer and then incorporating it with the information you have on the brand side, which, is a whole nother podcast, but it's definitely the value in retail media.
If there's a podcast about how to collect that data from the retailer, I would tune into that.
Yes.
As you said, there's over 600 different retail media networks. First of all, I think it's also really funny that you call them the omni shopper. Is that what you call them? The omni shopper? I really love that because when we started the Desire Company, I remember the data was if somebody's shopping on their phone or looking on their phone, they're not going to purchase. They're going to wait till they get to their desktop. That has completely changed.
Yeah, 80% of purchases are on a mobile device.
Yeah, I mean, complete opposite. But along with these massive changes, is the power that the retail media network is able to offer these different brands. And so there's 600 though. Now, the majority of them are very nascent and it's a very light offering in retail media. But when brands are prioritizing retail media versus traditional marketing channels, how do they even start thinking about that? What happens to their traditional marketing? Is that all going to be taken over by retail media? And then what is that pull? And how do you navigate between all of the different retailers that are trying to get a little bit of your money? I mean, I guess that's just your traditional marketing budget is being divvied up to them. But what happens to the traditional marketing?
I call it the three-headed monster of trade, brand, and shopper budgets. It's quite challenging inside an organization where the money is coming from and how you're accounting for it, and finance needs to be involved. And it's complex based on how your accounting works on your P&L. It's a very, very complex question to answer. I think it comes down to prioritization and who is your best partner on the retailer side. And we recently did a lot of research where I interviewed a lot of retailers, and I basically said to them, I was like, what do you want to hear from brands from a retail media perspective? And I asked brands the same question. And what I found to be quite interesting is we already know that brands want more data from retailers, right? Like that's a very typical sentiment. But what I didn't expect to find is that retailers want more data from brands. And they want to hear more about the category insights they have. They want to know who to talk to at the brand so that they can have more of a holistic conversation. They want to know what they know about their consumer, and they really want to have a partnership because they see the value in working together. Because if both sides of the fence don't work together, nobody will win. And I think as an industry, we're finally coming around to that. So I think what you're seeing in terms of the 600 retail media networks and the very small amount of budget is actually prioritizing which channels are driving the most value. And in the research that we recently did, we found that most organizations are really only prioritizing like 4 or 5 channels because they just don't have the budget and or the internal support to be able to work on that. But they also have a bit of a test and learn budget. So they leave some budget from a retail media perspective to say, okay, XYZ new retail media platform just popped up. Like, does it make sense for us to do this or spend money on it? Let's try. And are they doing something unique? And does it make sense for our consumers? Let's do a test and learn. If it makes sense, then we can reallocate the budget. So to your point about like, where does the money go from traditional marketing to retail media? I predict that there's going to be a mass consolidation from a retail media standpoint because it's just not sustainable. The brands do not have the money to support that many retail media networks, and the retailers aren't going to be able to fund it either. So I think has to be a world where it all gets consolidated in some way, and then the retailers are able to work with the brands specifically that make the most sense for their categories and vice versa. I don't know what that looks like, but I do think something like that will have to happen because there just isn't infinite money in this situation.
Do you think that it's the retail media networks? Is it the retailers buying the Leo Burnett's and the creative traditional agencies, or is it the publicists buying the retailers? When you say the consolidation is it has to come, and I agree with you because it's way too fragmented. Who becomes the consolidator?
Whew. I mean, it could go so many different ways. I mean, you can even think of like the Criteos and the Skies of the world. Like, how do they help consolidate, or what does that look like? Or is there a lower barrier to entry when you're working with different retailers where you don't have to spend $1 million? You can spend like 10,000, get this offering here, and you can play with your money a little bit differently. I mean, I think there's a world where the Publicists of the world could purchase them. Hadn't thought of the other scenario. I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting. I kind of compare it to streaming services, right? Like,
Sure.
There was Netflix, and then there was Hulu, and then there's Paramount, and then Peacock, and Star. And now they're kind of being bought up. So Disney Plus kind of owns more than one, So I think about it that way. I don't know how that will translate from the retailer standpoint because Walmart obviously is not going to own an Amazon, or Target isn't going to do the same. But I think potentially for some of the smaller players, they might kind of band together and create some sort of offering where you pay X amount of dollars and maybe you can get an ad on 3 different smaller grocery channels or something like that.
I like that. I mean, that's somewhat what you see with like Instacart even. That you could run retail media through Instacart, which will then appear on the sites that they host. The sponsored products that you see on the Fresh Market, as an example, comes from Instacart. It's not somebody dealing directly with the Fresh Market. So I think that's very interesting. And obviously, when it comes to prioritizing which are most effective, that becomes because they already were able to test a bunch of things. But without that test and learn, like, where's your recommendation of somebody starting? Because you get essentially a menu. Like, do you want a poster on the window? Do you want to be on the back of a receipt? Do you want to buy one, get one free? Do you want to be in our mailer? Do you want to be in our email? Do you want to be mentioned in a television commercial? Do you want to have video on your site? Like, where is the starting place that you would recommend?
Know your consumer. Where is your consumer shopping? Where are they spending your time? I mean, most brands have data around that. Like, they have category management teams. They might have an e-cat man or an e-commerce management team. They have a data and analytics team. Like, are your consumers age 60 plus? You'll know where they're going to shop. Are they younger than 20? You know where they're going to shop. I would say focusing on knowing your consumer and knowing where they are going to interact with that ad and starting with that versus like, hey, there's 30 options for ads and like, let's pick this one. More, who are we selling to? Where are they going to see this ad and where will it drive them to, I think is a better place to start, because then you'll actually get to the root of the problem. Not everybody's shopping on TikTok or not everybody's using Instacart or, so you really have to know your consumer first before you can make any of those choices. And then if you come from that place, you will be more effective because you're being personalized to that specific experience.
Absolutely. So now, moving to segment 3, retail media for retailers. So what we've been talking a lot about is brands. How are brands participating? How are they being asked to participate? What's in it for them? How are they measuring it? But now examining the other side, the retail media networks from the retailer's perspectives. Because as you have mentioned, they are not just selling products. They have very little margin on products. I'm always fascinated to find out how little retailers actually make on certain products. If it's electronics or if it's grocery or whatever it is, those margins aren't what the regular consumer would, what I used to naively think they were. And so they are becoming media owners, and media has a lot of value in being able to offer advertising on. I mean, that's what media companies do. So the shift opens up these new revenue streams, allowing them to maintain absolute control over their advertising environment. So, the obvious is Meta, Facebook, it's a media channel. So you could advertise on it and you could reach people. But now, so is Albertsons. So is Jewel Osco. If you have eyeballs and you have engagement with a specific demographic, you are an effective media channel. And that's where retailers are really leveraging this. And by leveraging their platforms, retailers really enhance their profitability while really providing more value to the advertisers, to the brands themselves. So using their platforms, given their first-party data, retailers are offering these advertisers highly targeted access to consumers at the point of purchase, and it not only generates additional revenue, but it allows retailers to maintain control over that advertising environment. So it is that seamless integration of the overall shopping experience, which I think is another reason why so many people have jumped in, because it does give them a lot more control. As we started this podcast with, you have so many different platforms that are putting ads here and ads there, but it's always in their native environment. This is bringing it into the retailer's native environment, creating a better experience for that shopper. Retailers, they all have their own mood, they all have their own vibe, and they can ensure that experience integrates seamlessly. But for smaller retailers, retail media networks presents an opportunity to somewhat level that playing field against their larger competitors. I mean, typically where Coca-Cola would spend the most promotional dollars on shopper marketing would be whoever has the most foot traffic, whoever, is the biggest retailer. This changes it because they could target so specifically. And by offering that unique data-driven advertising solutions, these niche retailers can attract brand partnerships and create new value propositions that they couldn't just a couple of years ago. So as retailers continue to develop these media capabilities, they're gaining these valuable insights. This data can inform the inventory decisions, which I think is fascinating, make them better retailers and drive more innovation across the business. So the questions, what do you see as this opportunity for retailers in building their own retail media network? What size do they have to be at? When should they start thinking about it? Is it, if you're not already doing it, it's too late? Where are we in this ecosystem?
I think you said it super well, that it's retailers shifting how they may have been working for hundreds of years and becoming media companies. And that doesn't happen overnight. As a part of some of the research I was talking about, I actually spoke with a retailer who is 2 years on their journey in building out a retail media network. And the thing that they shared was that they underestimated the amount of work and challenge it would be to actually set something like this up, mostly because of the internal elements of it, right? Because there's a level of technology needed, process, people, collaboration with the brands, understanding of the environment. So it's no small feat to be able to do it. And I think it has to have a very clear value proposition. Like, what is it actually going to drive? And are brands going to be able to have the budget to invest in it? So for any retailer who is going through this process and thinking about potentially creating a retail media network, my suggestion would be involve the brands. Like, get a cohort of brands who sell on your retailer together in a room and ask them what they want. Because the benefit in doing that is if you ask them what they want and you give them what they want, they will put money into it, right? Because they see the value and they built it with you and they see the opportunity. So to me, it's less about when and it's more about the why. Like, why are you building a retail media network? Don't just do it to do it because brands don't have money to just throw at you. Like, there has to be a very clear value proposition, and you really have to position that to the brands that you work with and are selling on your channel. And they want to be involved in this conversation. Like, they are asking to be involved in the conversation with the retailers. They want to have new innovative ways of thinking. They want to help build this with you. So I would reposition it to be more about, like, why are you doing it versus when should you do it? Because it doesn't make sense for everyone. And going back to the PDP content conversation we were having, if you don't have a site that's engaging to shop on and you don't have video capability and enhanced content and ratings and reviews, then you're not creating an experience that a retail media ad can drive someone to make a purchase. So there's so many of the kind of basics that need to be foundational before you can even think about a retail media network. And you really need to get the insight from the brand because they're the ones that are going to be giving you the money to make it possible.
Yeah, so Salsify put this out this morning. If you have bad product content with incomplete product information or no low quality videos, low quality videos, shoppers will abandon their cart. 45% of shoppers abandon their cart when there are no or low quality product images or videos. That to me is fascinating. I mean, that's a whole different understanding. And the amount of retailers that we speak to, and they're like, yeah, we have our retail media network, but we can't work with the Desire company yet because we don't have video on our site. It's like, oh, that's something so simple. So simple to fix. And
baseline.
Yeah, baseline. But you're spending all this time and building out this team, but you don't have just the 101 capabilities. It's really interesting because, and I don't blame the retailers. They're shifting from something that they have been doing, as you said, for hundreds of years, and they are now becoming media companies. And it takes a lot to compete with brands for those media dollars. And that's exactly what they're doing now.
I want to double click on that for a bit because I think e-commerce moves so quickly, just commerce in general, that brands, retailers, we're all guilty of it. We're like, let's move on this, let's do this. But I think the value is really taking a step back and asking why. I mean, I'm having a lot of conversations with brands around, we are going to say the 2-letter word AI. Like, a lot of people are like, we just want to do AI. And I'm like, well, why don't we take a step back? Like, why do we want to use AI? What will it enable? And I think that is a common question, to just take a step back and be like, why are we doing this? What is the value that it's driving for our consumers? Because if you can answer that question, then it makes sense to move forward. But if you don't have all of those building blocks the concepts are super simple, but the execution is just really, really hard.
Yeah. So speaking of execution being really, really hard, we are now moving into this, what some would call retail media 2.0 or 3.0, retail media 3.0, which is bridging that gap between the digital and the physical. It's one thing to have these really wonderful enhanced capabilities online, but how do you then mimic or add to that when people are in store? How do you use the first party data that is really the backbone of retail media? How are you seeing it come to life in store and bridging that gap between that digital and physical?
This is the most exciting topic for me because I think this is really the future of shopping, like how digital gets infused into in-store and how in-store experiences are going to continue to change. I mean, I've seen so many fascinating examples of this in multiple different categories. I mean, from a shopping perspective, you can have virtual try-ons where they don't even have that many products in the store. You just go touch the fabric, you order it, and it goes to your doorstep. Or from a grocery standpoint, they might have like an app on your phone. So when you enter the store, they know your preferences because you're logged in and they show you a coupon, or they say, hey, there's a new special to check out. They might have screens in the store or screens on the refrigerators. Like, I think the virtual element of using screens and using audio in the store is how you're going to see a lot of that infused. But I think a lot of it will be connected to your mobile phone, right? Because if you're logged into a specific app for a retailer, then they can give you a specific recommendation about something, or you can have a pop-up or an alert. And I think that's how, especially in the grocery space, that experience will really evolve. But to me, the exciting part for the omni shopper and what it is that they're really looking for is an experience. And so how can you actually create an in-store experience that's valuable to them? Can you bring in a beauty consultant? Can you bring in an influencer? Can you create an event where they get to try new products and share perspectives? In the alcohol industry, they do signed bottles, or they do like personalized bottles that you can purchase at a specific location, and they have specific events, or they have wine and cheese pairings. So consumers are really looking for more than just purchasing a product these days, especially in the wake of social media and influencers and more of that kind of discovery mindset. So that, to me, is what's really exciting about the infusion of digital and physical. And retail media plays a huge role in that, right? Because that's what you're seeing on those screens, and that's what you're seeing in the app. And that's how you're driving people to know about these specific experiences that they can connect with. And you have the data to say, oh, hey, you bought this type of beer. We're going to have a specific tasting. We know that you like it. Why don't you come to this store, because we know your zip code and we know where you live, right? That's where first-party data kind of takes the next level. But the challenge internally is how you coordinate all those efforts, because those are 6 or 7 different teams. That data might live in 4 different platforms, and how do you kind of build out a strategy that works for that? But whoever can figure that out in your organization, I think you'll be a first mover.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the cross promotion of different products, I think, is it's going to be one of the most useful to the consumer ways. And I just wonder if the first party data comes first or second in the in-store experience. For instance, if you're buying pasta sauce, and then there's something there, some screen or whatever, that, have you ever used this on polenta? And, like, wow, I never thought about using this on polenta. And polenta is all of a sudden right there, and you buy polenta from it. That's almost reversing it a little bit, or getting ahead of it, because I guess it's real time. We're real time first person data is what the stores can react to, that it's going to create the best experience for the consumer, and really, at the end of the day, increase sales, be a profit center, and a really nice experience, which this is all about. So before we get into the conclusion of this podcast, which I really appreciate you going deep in, I'm going to ask some really quick surface questions. I just want the first thing that comes to mind. This is where we put this is our expert corner. And first question, what's a strategy that everybody's following but nobody is questioning.
I said a bit about it before, like using AI. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing it, but they're not asking why they're doing it. And I think it's getting a lot of organizations into a challenging spot because they're just like, we want to use it, but there's no clear outcome or understanding of how it's going to help. And so they're having a hard time adopting it inside their organization and seeing the value.
Yes. So I think out of all of the guests that we've had, I think only one hasn't said that so far. So something's got to give.
Oh, really?
There,
oh, gosh.
Yes. Nobody, but because
Should
you're
I come
right
up
on.
with another answer?
No, I love it because it's just, I couldn't agree more. But what's a trend that you think will be on the decline or dead within the next year?
I don't know if it's necessarily a trend, but operating in silos cannot be a way of working. But I've said that for years. So I don't know if it's going to be dead, but I think the people who really don't focus on it are really going to have a hard time. They're just going to be really challenged to build out strategies that actually drive growth for their brand. It just can't be you said this, I said this, sales is over here, marketing's over here. Like, it just can't continue to be that way, but it has been for years. So I don't know if it will ever die.
Wishful thinking or the future?
Yeah, exactly.
What's one thing in your industry that everybody is afraid to admit?
That change is constant and it's never going to stop. I think people are looking for, what is my org structure supposed to be? Like, what is my measurement strategy? Like, check done. But I don't think that people have really come to the realization that your org structure is your org structure for 1 year. And then you have to change it. Your measurement framework is your measurement framework for a year, and then you have to change it. Like, mentally really being prepared for that and prepared for people in roles becoming irrelevant because that's how it's supposed to be as you're evolving as an organization. That's hard to admit, but I think that is very much the reality.
I could not love that more. Like, I love that answer so much. I think we need to do a deep dive just on that.
Oh, let's do it. I'm down. I love change management. I'm all about it.
It is the hardest thing for employees, different parts of the team to get their head around. Like, I love that answer. What's the most controversial opinion that you hold?
I don't know if this is controversial, but I believe that, and I work with mostly large organizations, so this is more for large organizations, that you cannot be successful within the parameters of how you've worked for hundreds of years, and you kind of need to blow it up. So if you want to build an omnichannel team, you can't build it within the structure of the pillars that you currently have. Like, you need to start from scratch, and you need to fundamentally change how you think about the roles in your organization to be successful. So it can't just be sales and marketing and shopper and retail media. It needs to be omnichannel, and you need to have different reporting structures and different teams and different leaders. And I know that's really, really hard to do, but I think we are going to get to a point where it has to be the option. And I think that's controversial because people listen to me and they're like, well, I can't do that. And my answer back is, people have done it and it's been super successful. It's just hard. And it takes a lot of leadership alignment, a lot of change management, a lot of planning, but it's going to set you up for the next 10 years.
I mean, that's exactly it. It takes a long time to execute, to plan and execute. And I think there's a lot of leaders out there that are scared to start on something like that because it's going to take so long to come to fruition that by the time it does, are they missing their KPIs and already going to be out of a job? So it's very interesting. And if you had to bet your career on one prediction for this industry, what would it be?
That we're going to be having the same conversations in the next 5 years.
Well,
just of a different color. I mean, I think I've learned that after being in the industry for so many years. There's a lot of things that change, but there's a lot of things that stay the same. And change is slow, change is hard. And the key elements of being successful in this space are never going to go out of style, but being able to do them right is really hard. A lot of these conversations we're having now are going to continue to be those conversations, just maybe a different flavor with some other new technologies, whether it's AI or something else that has come up that we have to figure out how to deal with. Because maybe this is another controversial opinion, but we just need to fundamentally understand that the way that people shop now is not the way that they're going to shop in the future. And maybe that's my like prediction that I would bet my career on. And it's going to get further and further and further away from how organizations are structured, which means they need to make bigger and bigger leaps and changes to keep up.
Yeah, that's great. So this has been absolutely a fascinating conversation. So Lauren, thank you very much for being a part of this. I mean, I guess the conclusion really is it has only been 30 years. It started very, very lightly, one digital ad, and it has led to a complete ecosystem change all around what can you do with first-person data? How can you leverage it to create more sales, more promotional sales opportunities, more revenue for the retailer? But at the heart of it all, none of it matters, none of it works unless it's the right experience that you're creating for the consumer itself, the shopper themselves. And with that in mind, I think people are going to keep on finding more and more creative ways to create that consistent shopper journey from awareness all the way to post-purchase. I think they're going to be able to, focusing on that consumer, figure out what the right blend of the digital and physical space is, as long as they're listening and reacting to the consumer. So, Lauren, thank you very much for contributing. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for being here with us today. If you want to connect with Lauren, she's on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Lauren Livak, Livak, and check out the Digital Shelf Institute at digitalshelfinstitute.org. We will have links along with the show. So thank you to the listeners for tapping into an expert, where we tap into the experts for you. And if you want to learn more, please visit thedesirecompany.com and click on resources. We have a white paper specifically on this entitled An Expert in Every Aisle. Lauren, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eric. This was a lot of fun.